impossible designs. And so maybe for us, a new name for a new era. We began 20 years ago when we were asked to start to look at building 1.2 billion square feet of space over 7 freeways in Sydney called Darling Park. These 3 towers here, the way they stand today. And it was quite easy to see that without getting rid of the freeways as the dominant force, there was no way the city would connect down to the water. The base of the towers has over 100,000 square feet of public amenity. The ground plane of Darling Park belongs to the citizens of Sydney, not the owners of the towers. And the corporate park forms a liaison with the Sydney Botanic Garden and is the largest private park open in Australia to the citizens of that country. The lobbies were designed to look like 4-star or 5-star hotels, and the ceiling of the Star Court itself recreates the stars over Sydney with the 728 stars known when it was discovered 3 centuries ago, but painted with Australian and Aboriginal myths and legends. But the life of the city begins at the street, and with over 5,000 seats at Cockle Bay Wharf, we changed the way that the western side of Sydney opened itself up to the CBD. In Kuala Lumpur, 8 million square feet of new space, we were asked to build 1 million square feet of new retail, 2 new 500,000 square foot office towers, residential, and the 2 towers here at the end, which are affectionately known as Twin Peaks in Kuala Lumpur, represent a new way of thinking about mixed-use developments, as city centers are now the new building typology for our time. These towers sit at the end of a boulevard that'll have over 100 restaurants on it when it's fully leased up. It'll combine over 4.5 million square feet of retail and provide a brand new city center west of the heart of Kuala Lumpur that changes the way the entire city is developing from a center spoke to multiple nodes around the perimeter. But the idea of Mid-Valley Gardens is to create a diversity of offer with over 80,000 people that will eventually be housed in all this space. This is the new retail and leisure center. We had to mix all the different varieties of leisure and retail, entertainment, cultural facilities with the core operational investments of residential and office. On a smaller scale, on the Channel Islands of Jersey and St. Helier, we put together a new marina that took all those ideas and crushed it down to the intricacy and intimacy of this small community. The promenades along the waterfront of Queen Elizabeth Marina, performance squares, and the 3 towers representing a regatta of ships at sail against the granite cliffs of that island include, of course, a new observation deck open to the public where they can see the history of the island as much as just to look out onto the harbor itself. Inside, the public amenity of roof gardens and a new chart room will be the parlor for all the citizens of Jersey to come down to St. Helier and enjoy their waterfront for the first time, where it actually has a physical presence that's civic-oriented rather than industrially oriented. Following on from that, we went to Belfast, and there on the site of the Howland and Wolff docks, 240 acres, where the Titanic was built, we set up a new community for 12,000 units, all centered around a new museum to celebrate the building, not just of the Titanic, but over 250 years of shipbuilding in Belfast. 100 years ago, Belfast was the industrial capital of shipbuilding and transportation in the world. And what today Boeing has in Washington, Belfast was a century ago. The new museum itself sits to celebrate the 4 ages of shipbuilding, from timber to iron to steel and aluminum. And the setup of the interior spaces of the museum is based to represent the gantryways and the spatial configuration, including recreations of the size of the Titanic itself, and the ceiling above, the stars and the position of the sky when the ship sank nearly 100 years ago. The grandeur and majesty of these civic spaces are what give a city its identity. And even as the tallest tower that we're working on now in Belfast is based on the cribbage works the wooden scaffolding of the old shipyard and captured in the new tower to give a signature that identifies with Belfast rather than is seen as part of an international style. Southampton, of course, wanted to get into the act, and they too asked us to put together the tallest buildings in their city. But we said that this is the place where the Mayflower left to go to America, and the history of that philosophy of politics contributed also to a whole new park system and water system down on the harbor. The compass buildings, as they're called, port and starboard, include a balcony that connects between them. It's an observation deck, all looking out on a new harbor on the southern part of the United Kingdom. Croydon wanted to get a signature skyline silhouette to help identify itself. From the chalk downs of southern England, chalk panels would be installed that includes a hotel at a base, service apartments, 8 floors of service apartments, and then housing and luxury housing up at the top. The tower is very simple in its shape, but it's the base that connects it to the city and the train station and the university nearby, and will provide some of the best civic spaces in Croydon. 20 million square feet at the Dubai International Financial Center changed the game for us. Dubai, trying to establish itself as the financial capital of the Arabian Gulf, asked us to look at 20 stories, and what we said was, it's not the towers that matter, it's the podium that sits on, where all the life comes. A kilometer-long retail mall spread over 3 levels, a garden plate on top of that, which is based on a series of 9 Arabian gardens. And it's not the core business that we're interested in, but the non-core business that breathes life into any community. And as the tower grows, Dr. Omar asked us to look at a mosque tower where the mosque would actually be built on top of the tower, and the minaret would be the speed lift to get people up. Each of the connections to the 20 towers on the site has its own vestibule along the arcade based on the 9 separate dynasties in the Arabian history. And the central mall has a glass waterway that filters sun through the bottom of the glass channel down, and the decoration of the tops of it are based on the guilloche patterns of all the currencies of the Middle East. Dubai International Financial Center is under construction today. It is the most densely compacted, centrally integrated mixed-use development anywhere in the Middle East. And the parks and gardens, the hotels, the amenities, convention facilities, galleries, shops, prayer rooms, meeting areas, libraries, and partnerships with some of the great cultural institutions in the world will make this financial center the most culturally rich of any in the world. And the 2 financial towers here that sit above the new stock exchange pick up the pattern of their facades from those same guilloche patterns on the Arabian currency. Birmingham has partnered with Chicago and sought to create a new identity for its own skyline. A 53-story residential tower on the site of the old television works provides a brand new identity for Birmingham. Scheduled to begin construction in February, its residential units will create over 400 new residential places for people to live in the heart of Birmingham. But again, the life of this tower occurred at the ground plane. The restaurants, the library, the cafes, the bars, the reception rooms, as well as the private reception area for the residents themselves, all open this tower up to the citizens of the Midlands of the United Kingdom. And on the ceiling, we have a mural painted that represents the Lunar Society. Founded over 300 years ago, this was the society at the beginning of the Enlightenment that met only on the nights of full moon because it was the only safe time that people could get home after they were meeting. And the great inventors like James Watt, Benjamin Franklin was part of the Lunar Society, all celebrated a place where people would get together and talk about the great ideas that made the Midlands of the United Kingdom such a strong economy. And so we've used that as the basis to restore the V Tower's contribution to the ethos of Birmingham as much as the spirit of the heartland of England. The tower itself has an observatory up at the top. The astrolabe in the top corner spins, of course, to talk about the flow of the seasons around the world, again linked to the Lunar Society. And the tower overlooks Victoria Square, which is the town hall, city hall of Birmingham, and the civic spaces. We think of buildings, of course, as objects, as form, but they also have a temporal presence. And that temporal presence is what celebrates the pageantry of civic life. It's no longer good enough just to sell a tower or to fill it up. It's the non-core activities, the routine of everyday life, that heroic routine of when we get together that makes a place unique. And if we don't provide for that, these vertical cities become vertical ghost towns. And we've had 100 years of the 20th century proving that to us. And if we go from the sublime to the absolutely absurd, Harrah's Entertainment International asked us to come in and link their 7 casinos, Caesar's Palace, Harrah's, Imperial House, Flamingo, Barbary Coast, Bally's, and Paris itself, into a new city center. A new street over 1 kilometer long as an entertainment street, linked together in the middle by our new retail centerpiece, entertainment centerpiece, and a prism court that sits above this on the roof garden, providing a ceiling and a roof that pulls back and opens up the dinner theater and the performance space inside to the stars at night. In Las Vegas, the stars do come out at night at Harrah's Entertainment Epicenter. But the lifestyle groups, the 7 different lifestyle groups, the psychographic profiling of the people that come to this are all geared around music and food. It's the way we divide up the diversity of cultures today. And as a signpost, we have Eva and Daniel, Fred and Ginger, Jackie and Jack, or Jack and Marilyn, whatever you want to call. The signs become 2 600-foot tall towers that become emblematic of the character of the life going on inside. And this view from the Bellagio looking at the White City shows how much it organizes the center of Las Vegas. Miami, 8 years ago, decided to steal as much of the mega-yacht trade as it could from Fort Lauderdale and had an international competition to build a new mega-yacht marina. We won that competition with Flagstone Properties and recommended building not just the 58 slips for the mega-yachts, which are really floating palaces, but a new ground plane space with the Shangri-La Tower and the Park Hyatt. And the ground plane is where this project comes to life. It's the only place in Miami where you can see western sunsets. And the parks and gardens, the boating basins for kids, and the rooftop restaurants all look over the ships to the sunsets over Miami's skyline. Borrowing from the genius of 1,000 years of innovation and invention in Arabian culture, from science and medicine, mathematics, sociology, and even economics, Mohammed bin Rashid Gardens converts 88 square kilometers, about 40 square miles in the heart of Dubai, into a new spectacular city, a city that has backyards, a city where people can enjoy the quality of a history of Arabian garden design unprecedented in the world. This is the largest park and garden complex ever contemplated in the Middle East. And the transformation of these mud huts and farmers' fields into a spectacular new canal city fits it in with the great canal cities of the world. These canals and residential complexes have backyards. So instead of towers looking into towers, we plan to provide the new equivalent of Beverly Hills and Rodeo Drive for Dubai. These canals and the waterways are going to be democratically used, and all the design are inspired by Arabian ornament rather than the grid of European and American cities. Look at this spectacular diagram of twisted squares. It's called the breath of the compassionate. What a poetic way to describe city planning. And the canals and parks and building blocks all represent a view of this city center that will be unmistakably Arabian in its inspiration. Most of the Middle East has forsaken its own heritage to buy North American and European solutions, turned its back on almost 6,000 years of a profound history. What we want to do in Mohammed bin Rashid Gardens is restore the genius of that cultural history. Create a centerpiece that speaks to the diversity of thought that based all of its work on hundreds of years of study at academies scattered throughout the Middle East. A new series of canals, gardens fed by sweet water, desalinated water, black water that's recycled, and also saltwater parks changes the ecosystem of how to provide and maintain parks. And at the center of this, a new house of nature where we move a zoo and botanic gardens at the heart of the city center as opposed to in the exiled land on the side. Over 200 nationalities, hundreds of different faiths, and in the House of Humanity, 3 overlaying equilateral triangles, one representing the pantheistic religions, one the polytheistic, and the third the monotheistic religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism pulled together and all anchored in the Abrahamic faiths. From these 3 city centers, the House of Commerce, the House of Nature, and the House of Humanity, comes the 4th city center called the House of Wisdom, which celebrates the genius of Arabian research that went on in the 9th and 10th centuries just outside of Baghdad. A new place where the nations of the world gather with their best and brightest, new universities that go into the archaeology of the Middle East as much as all the new industries and economies of the world, a centerpiece that deals with the study and the wisdom of Arabians' contribution to the rest of the world's knowledge, is at its core. At one end, a library, a Congress sphere seating 6,000, and a new mosque at the end named after Sheikh Mohammed. The Grand Canal here is oriented towards Mecca and becomes a ready reminder in the landscape of all the access for all prayers pointed towards the holy shrines at Mecca. You can see the scale of this. In Dubai, which began as a leisure and theme destination down here, through the work that's going on with Emaar, Dubai Properties, and Nikhil, has redefined itself in a cultural and a business sense. It's shown that in a scant period of 25 years, you can redefine any nation in the world. And the investment and the phasing that we have going on is not just putting office or residential in those, but 30 complete city centers combined to provide a new population of 200,000 people. The phasing diagram is simple. From the creek, we carve a new canal that connects back out to the Arabian Gulf, a 26-kilometer astrolabe gardens that creates the centerpiece of Mohammed bin Rashid Gardens. The parkways follow the reti of the astrolabes, and the residential communities that are built here over the next 20 years will define for the first time a quality of life that's missing in Dubai today. This is city building that represents the ethos of a culture, not the traffic engineer's dreams. This is thinking of cities that capture the new economies of the 21st century, not the old economies of Europe and North America stamped into the Middle East. The Silk routes used to span from Morocco to China, Kazakhstan down to Central Asia, and the Emir of Kuwait asked us to get involved to design a new city for 750,000 people at the northern tip of the Arabian Gulf, across from Kuwait City, and on the delta of the Tigris and Euphrates River. A new tower is a symbol of this, represented the Burj Mubarak al-Kabir Tower, 1,001 meters in height, representing 1,001 Arabian Nights. The poetry of the tower speaks to the history of the folk tales of this culture, and all the design of these city centers, again, reflecting the patterns of ornament. And it doesn't matter whether it's the culture city, the business city, the eco city, or the leisure city, each one is grown out of Arabian ornament that creates the parks, the gardens, the palisades, the parkways, the marinas, and the building blocks that give identity to this new city that will open up Central Asia. On the skyline, a new tower, the Burj Mubarak al-Kabir, a tower of 1,001 Arabian Nights. 3 blades rise up, 7 villages of 30-story towers stacked with 7 star gardens in between them with schools and recreation, retail, maintenance, and 3 centers of worship atop each blade, a synagogue, a cathedral, and a mosque. The Burj Mubarak al-Kabir Tower tries to recognize that the role that the Middle East has to reconcile the conflict with the faiths is as much a part an architectural endeavor as it is a political or religious one. This tower will be a symbol of how the birthplace of the Abrahamic religions can be represented as a unifying element rather than a divisive element. And the parks and gardens and retail and residential areas that scatter around the base are all inspired by the diversity of Arabian ornament and Arabian lifestyles rather than European or North American. It's an amazing idea to contemplate building a city. And today, Kuwait is negotiating with Iraq and Iran all the way up to Kazakhstan to build motorways and pipelines and railroads. And this will become the port city of this new Middle East that will emerge as an economic bloc and bring stability to that part of the world. We build in improbable times, and we contemplate impossible designs. We're all part of a new era where the economics of greed and avarice and the politics of fear will have to be retired to build new civic places that will welcome the world to come and work together. And so we have an opportunity here just 24 hours ago to see the last thing that we've been working on in Canberra. We get this up. And this has been an extraordinary project for us. The idea is a new cathedral for Australia. The Southern Cross Sanctuary sits as a new hope for Australia to join the nations and the continents of the world with a central place, a sacred place of gathering that celebrates the diversity of faiths in that country as well. The Southern Cross Sanctuary finds its place on Walter Burley Griffin's master plan. 100 years ago, he moved out of Chicago after winning this competition and designed a new master plan based on theosophy. But what is built in Canberra today are icons of politics, gifts from the Canadian and the American and British governments on the skyline. The Southern Cross Sanctuary represents a new meeting place for all the diversity of religions and faiths in the world to come together in one of the most ecumenical countries in the world. Down Kings Boulevard towards Lake Walter Burley Griffin, the site is set up with a new tower, 30 stories in height, that will tell within itself the history of religion as it's impacted itself in Oceania and Australia in particular. The gardens themselves with the 12 pavilions are set up to represent the diversities of faith in Australia and a counterbalance to the Anzac War Memorial. The tower stands on Lake Walter Burley Griffin, and the gardens themselves, called the Skylines Gardens, describe the spirit of the Aboriginal faiths and religions that were there before the Europeans arrived. The Bushland Ring will accommodate over 15,000 people. Charles Sturt University has a new school of theology. The museums and galleries and reception rooms and the Hall of Voices, where testimonies of people's beliefs and faiths and religions and convictions can be recorded. And from the spectacular ambulatory around, looking onto the reflecting pond and the gardens, a place for people to gather inside a 5,000-seat auditorium, the Great Hall, and on the triangular prism, classrooms for the university and places to look out on the sunlit plains of Australia. This is a skyscraper cathedral. It's a skyscraper temple. It celebrates the diversity of faith today. It reconciles the balance between philosophy, science, and religion that has been sought now for over 100 years. It explores the new way we think about the way we get in touch with the heavens, align with the firmament, and worship together as a congregation. and around it a spiral gallery that stops at the top and arcs its way down, and on the gallery walls the history of faith in Australia with a prayer chandelier. The amphitheater outside, the gardens, the ambulatory, the great hall, all combined to create a new centerpiece for the spiritual side of life as much as the secular side of life. And the tower form that we all know inspires a new skyline, not just for Australia or Canberra, but a new pilgrimage place for all the world to see. Thank you all very much.